The date is June 30th, 1764. We are in the deep south of France, in a province known as Gevaudan. It is a place that feels forgotten by God. A rugged, mountainous landscape of dense forests, peat bogs, and jagged granite ridges. The wind here doesn't just blow, it screams through the valleys. 14-year-old Jeanne Boulet is tending her flock of sheep near the village of Les Ubacs. She is a child of the mountains, tough, wary, used to the dangers of the wild. She knows about wolves. Every child in Gevaudan knows about wolves. You shout, you throw stones, and usually, the wolves scatter. They are scavengers, opportunistic and cowardly. But on this afternoon, something steps out of the tree line that does not scatter. It is immense. Its fur is a strange russet color with a dark stripe running down its spine. It moves with a terrifying, fluid intelligence. It ignores the sheep entirely. It isn't here for the livestock. It is here for her. We don't know if Jeanne had time to scream. The attack is swift, brutal, and surgically precise. When her body is found later, the villagers are met with a sight that defies their understanding of nature. This wasn't a desperate mauling by a starving animal. Her throat has been torn out. Her heart has been targeted. The villagers bury Jeanne, assuming it was a freak tragedy. A rabid wolf, perhaps. A bear passing through. They are wrong. Jeanne Boulet was not just a victim. She was the first casualty in a 3-year war. Over the next 1,000 days, this creature will strike hundreds of times. It will survive bullets. It will outsmart entire armies. It will humiliate the King of France and terrify the entire Western world. This was not a myth. This was not a fairy tale. This is the story of the Beast of Gévaudan. The summer of 1764 turned into a season of blood. In the weeks following Jeanne Boulet's death, the attacks didn't just continue. They escalated with a ferocity that suggested something almost performative. In August, a 15-year-old girl was killed. In September, 4 more victims. By the time the first snows began to dust the highlands, the death toll was climbing into the double digits. And with every body found, the panic in the villages deepened into a hysterical dread. The survivors, those lucky few who saw the creature and lived, began to circulate descriptions that sounded impossible. They spoke of a beast as large as a calf, with a chest as wide as a horse's. They described a tail so long it dragged on the ground, tipped with a tuft of fur like a lion. They spoke of a head that was monstrous, with jaws that could crush a human skull like a walnut. But it was the behavior of the beast that kept the peasants awake at night. Wolves, by nature, are cautious. They attack the legs of their prey to hamstring them. They go for the easy kill, the sick, the stragglers. This beast did neither. It attacked the head. It would leap from the brush, bypassing the limbs, and crush the skull or tear out the throat in a single motion. It showed a distinct preference for humans over animals. Witnesses reported seeing the beast charge through a herd of cattle, animals that would have been an easy feast for a wolf, just to get to the shepherdess standing behind them. It was hunting us. The local priests, sensing the rising terror, took to their pulpits. This was no ordinary animal, they preached. This was a fléau de Dieu, a scourge of God, a punishment sent to chastise the people of Gévaudan for their sins. And if it was a demon, how could men hope to kill it? On October 8th, 2 hunters stumbled upon the beast in a chateau garden. They were close, point-blank range. They raised their muskets and fired. They saw the creature stumble. They saw it fall. But before they could reload, the beast shook itself off like a wet dog and vanished into the woods. The rumor spread like wildfire through the taverns and market squares. Bullets do not kill it. Whether it was supernatural armor or just thick hide and matted fur, the legend was cemented. The people of Gevaudan were trapped in their own homes, hunted by a phantom that could walk through gunfire. But the violence was only beginning, because when you cannot kill a monster with prayer, you send for the cavalry. By early 1765, the situation in Gevaudan had become a national embarrassment. News of the slaughter had traveled 300 miles north to the gilded halls of Versailles. King Louis XV, sitting on the most powerful throne in Europe, was furious. The British press was mocking him. How could the absolute monarch of France claim to rule by divine right if he couldn't even protect his peasants from a glorified dog? The king's response was swift and overwhelming. He ordered Captain Jean-Baptiste Duhamel and his elite dragoons to Gevaudan. Duhamel arrived with the arrogance of a modern military commander facing a primitive insurgency. He brought 57 dragoons, battle-hardened cavalrymen. He conscripted the local population. At one point, he organized a hunt involving 20,000 men. Imagine the scene: 20,000 men, armed with pikes, muskets, and torches, beating the forests in a wall of noise and steel. They combed every valley. They burned brush to flush the creature out. They laid poisoned bait. It should have been over in a week. Instead, the beast made a mockery of them. While Duhamel's army was scouring the eastern forests, the beast would appear 10 miles to the west, killing a young boy in broad daylight. When the soldiers moved west, the beast would double back, slaughtering a woman in the very village the troops had just left. It moved with a tactical awareness that unnerved the soldiers. It seemed to know the difference between an armed dragoon and a helpless peasant. It avoided the traps. It skirted the ambush sites. Captain Duhamel began to sound less like a military man and more like a frightened child. In his letters to the king, he wrote that the animal was unkillable. He complained of the terrain. He complained of the locals. But between the lines, you could read his fear. He was hunting a ghost. One incident in particular captured the hopelessness of the struggle. On January 12, 1765, a group of young children, led by a brave 10-year-old named Jacques Portefeuille, was attacked. The beast charged them. Instead of running, young Jacques rallied his friends. They fought back with sticks specifically sharpened for this purpose. They formed a phalanx, jabbing at the monster's eyes and mouth. Amazingly, they drove it off. The king was so impressed he rewarded the children with money and an education. But notice the irony. The finest soldiers in France, with their muskets and horses, couldn't find the beast. But a group of children with sticks found it easily. Or rather, it found them. The military campaign was a disaster. The attacks continued. The body count rose. The king, humiliated by Duhamel's failure, recalled the dragoons. He realized he didn't need an army. He needed a killer. He sent for the most famous hunter in the kingdom. François Antoine was not a soldier. He was the king's lieutenant of the hunt. He was 71 years old, a veteran of the forests, a man who had killed thousands of wolves in his lifetime. He arrived in Gevaudan not with an army, but with a small team of professionals and huge tracking hounds. Antoine was methodical. He ignored the local rumors of demons and bulletproof hides. He treated this as a pest control problem. He studied the attack patterns. He mapped the terrain. And on September 20th, 1765, in the woods of the Abbey of Chazes, he got his shot. Antoine and his nephew spotted a massive wolf, far larger than average, weighing 130 pounds. Antoine fired his heavy musket, loaded with a massive charge of powder and buckshot. The shot struck the animal in the eye. It fell. But even then, the legend of its resilience held true. The wolf struggled back to its feet and charged Antoine. It took a second shot from his nephew to finally put the creature down. The carcass was inspected. It was huge. It had scars on its body that seemed to match the wounds inflicted by the children months earlier. Survivors were brought in to identify it. They looked at the dead animal, nodded, and signed the affidavits. "This is the beast," they said. Was it fear that made them agree, or hope, or perhaps the simple desire to believe the nightmare was finally over? Antoine had the wolf embalmed and rushed to Versailles. It was displayed in the royal court. The king was delighted. The British press was silenced. Antoine was hailed as a national hero, showered with titles and money. The Beast of Gévaudan was officially declared dead. The history books in Paris closed the chapter. But back in the high country, the wind was changing. For 2 months, there was peace. The snow fell. The peasants ventured back into the fields. They began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were safe. Then came December 2nd, 1765. 2 young boys were tending cattle near La Bessière-Saint-Marie. The attack came from nowhere. The older boy was mauled, his face torn. The beast had returned. Or perhaps it had never left. The year that followed, 1766, is known as the Dark Period. When news of the new attacks reached Paris, the king refused to listen. Politically, the problem was solved. The beast was dead. It was stuffed and sitting in a museum. To admit that the attacks were continuing would be to admit that the king had been duped, that the great François Antoine had killed the wrong animal. So the king did the only thing a politician could do. He ignored it. The people of Gevaudan were abandoned. The newspapers were ordered to stop printing stories about the attacks. No more soldiers were coming. No more royal hunters. They were alone in the dark with the monster. And the monster knew it. Emboldened by the lack of resistance, the beast's behavior became even more brazen. It began entering villages. It snatched children from their doorsteps. The death toll in this forgotten period was horrific. But where the king failed, a local legend would rise. Enter Jean Chastel. Chastel is the most mysterious figure in this entire saga. A local innkeeper and hunter, he was a man of the mountains, rough, solitary, and deeply religious. There were whispers about him in the villages. Some said he had been in prison during the early attacks. Some said his son kept strange company. But Jean Chastel had something the soldiers didn't. He understood the beast. On June 19, 1767, the local marquis organized one final, desperate hunt. Jean Chastel volunteered. He took his position in the woods of Tenazere. According to the legend, Chastel was not just hunting, he was praying. He had his Bible open, he was reading litanies, and in his musket, he had loaded bullets that he had melted down himself, some say from a silver Virgin Mary medallion, blessed by a priest. This is where the story pivots from history to folklore. Witnesses say the beast stepped out of the dense foliage and saw Chastel. But instead of charging or fleeing, it simply stopped. It sat down. It looked at him. It was almost a moment of recognition. Chastel finished his prayer, closed his Bible, raised his musket, and fired. The shot hit the beast square in the chest. This time there was no resurrection, no charging through the smoke. The monster of Gevaudan collapsed and died instantly. The reign of terror, which had claimed over 100 lives, was over. But if you think the mystery ended with the gunshot, you are mistaken. Because when they dragged the carcass into the village square and cut it open, what they found inside and what they saw on the outside only deepened the horror. The animal Jean Chastel killed was examined by a notary and several surgeons. Their report still exists in the French National Archives, and it is baffling. They described an animal that looked like a wolf, but wrong. The report notes legs shorter than a wolf's, a head that was monstrously large, and a coat of fur that was red with black stripes, colors rarely seen in European wolves. It had an extra set of claws, or dew claws, that were strangely developed. But the most chilling discovery was in its stomach. Inside, they found the shoulder of a small child, freshly eaten. So, what was it? For 250 years, historians and cryptozoologists have fought over the answer. Theory 1. The hyena. Many contemporary descriptions, the sloping back, the stripes, the formidable bite strength, the laugh-like vocalizations reported by some survivors, point to a striped hyena. Could an exotic animal have escaped a private menagerie? It fits the physical description, but hyenas are scavengers, rarely aggressive man-eaters on this scale. Theory 2. The prehistoric survivor. Some hopeful monster hunters suggest a remnant population of dire wolves or bear dogs, amphicyonids. While cinematic, there is zero biological evidence to support a prehistoric predator surviving in 18th century France without detection. Theory 3. The wolf-dog hybrid. This is the most scientifically plausible theory. A cross between a large wolf and a powerful breed of domestic dog, like a mastiff, would create an animal with no fear of humans, immense size, and predatory instincts. But there is a fourth theory, the darkest one, the one that explains the intelligence of the beast. The one that explains why it stopped and looked at Jean Chastel. The theory of the serial killer. Some historians believe the beast was not hunting alone. They suggest that the creature was trained. Consider the facts. The beast avoided armed men. It targeted the neck, a kill command. It seemed to vanish into thin air when cornered. And Jean Chastel, the man who killed it, had been imprisoned earlier in the investigation because he led the king's guides into a bog. Was Jean Chastel's son, Antoine, involved? The son was a reclusive man who lived alone in the woods with exotic dogs. The theory goes like this. A sadistic master trained a hybrid beast to hunt humans. He armored it with boar hide, explaining the bullet resistance. He guided it with whistles, and when the heat got too high, when the king turned his gaze away, the father, Jean Chastel, knew he had to end it to save his family. When the beast stepped out of the woods and sat down, it wasn't looking at a hunter. It was looking at its master. It was waiting for a command. And the command was death. The body of the creature was sent to Paris, but it rotted on the journey and was unceremoniously destroyed. We have no DNA, no bones, only the dusty letters of terrified captains and the graves of 100 innocent people. We know the deaths were real. We know the fear was real, but the identity of the killer remains buried in the mist. Was it simply a pack of rabid wolves, exaggerated by mass hysteria? Was it an exotic monster brought from Africa? Or was it the cruelest weapon ever devised by a human mind? A serial killer using nature as his knife? I want you to act as the jury. Look at the evidence we've laid out. The intelligence, the bullet resistance, the strange connection to the Chastel family. What do you think actually stalked the woods of Gevaudan? Scroll down to the comments right now and give me your verdict. Was it beast, man, or myth? I'll see you in the next nightmare.